The papers made a sound when I set them on the table. Not a loud sound, just that soft, papery whisper of a stack landing flat on a Sunday tablecloth. But I swear every single person in that dining room heard it like a gunshot. Carol looked at those papers, and I finally understood. She never expected me to keep records. She'd been counting on me being the kind of woman who fumes quietly and forgives publicly, the kind who grips her fork under the table and smiles through the soup course, and goes home and cries in the car. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that I'm an architect by training and by temperament, and architects document everything. Every revision, every discrepancy, every date something was promised, and every date it wasn't delivered. I had 3 years of documentation in that folder, and I put it right next to the breadbasket. But let me back up, because none of this starts at that dining room table. It starts in Portland on a Tuesday morning in October when I met a 6-year-old girl who drew everything in gray. I've lived in Portland for 15 years. I moved here from Columbus for a job at a mid-size architecture firm and never left, which is how it goes for a lot of people in this city. You come for something specific, and then the mountains get into you, and suddenly you can't imagine living somewhere flat. I run my own small firm now, 4 employees including me, and we do a mix of residential remodels and small commercial projects. I like the work because it's physical and logical at the same time. You have to see what's there and what could be there simultaneously. You document obsessively, measurements, photos, change orders, because the difference between a wall in the right place and a wall in the wrong place is a 1/4 inch on paper and a lawsuit in real life. I keep notes the way other people breathe. It's not a choice, it's just how my brain is wired. I met Brandon at a fundraiser for a local housing nonprofit. He was standing near the bar looking like a man who'd been talked into attending something and was now making the best of it, which is a look I find deeply relatable. He's an engineer, civil, works for a firm that does infrastructure projects, bridges and drainage systems, and the unglamorous bones of cities. We talked for 2 hours about load-bearing calculations, and he made me laugh 3 times in the first 40 minutes, which is my personal threshold for this person is worth knowing. He asked for my number, and I gave it to him. And then he didn't text for 4 days, which I later learned was because he was working up the nerve, not because he was playing games. I respected that when I found out. It told me something about how he operates. He told me about Lily on our 3rd date. He didn't bury it or build up to it dramatically. He just said, "There's someone I need you to know about before this goes any further," and told me about his daughter, who was 6 years old, whose mother had died in a car accident 14 months earlier, and who was currently living with him in a house in Northeast Portland and attending 1st grade and not talking very much. He said it all in a level voice, but his hands were flat on the table, pressed down, the way you press down on something to keep it from moving. I told him I wanted to meet her. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was checking something, and then he said, "Okay." Lily was small for 6 and very serious. She had Brandon's dark eyes and her mother's red hair, which I didn't know at the time, but learned later from a photograph. When I came over for dinner that first time, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and evaluated me with the focused attention of a scientist observing a new variable. She didn't perform. She didn't try to charm me or retreat behind Brandon's leg. She just watched me, and I got the feeling she'd been watching adults carefully for a while and had learned a lot from it. I didn't push. I talked to Brandon and let her watch, and at some point she said, unprompted, "You eat your vegetables first." I said, yes, I did, because then dessert is something to look forward to. She considered this for a moment and then went back to her food. But after dinner, she showed me her drawings, which she kept in a shoebox under her bed, and every single one of them was in gray pencil. Gray houses, gray trees, gray figures of people standing at a distance from each other. Before we go on, if you're enjoying the story so far, tap that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment. Thank you. That shoebox broke something open in me. I didn't say anything about it to Brandon that night. I just thought about those gray drawings on the drive home. And I thought about what it means to see the world in gray when you're 6 years old. And I thought about the kind of patient, steady presence a person would need to slowly offer a different palette. I knew by then that I was going to love this kid. I didn't know yet how much that was going to cost me. Brandon and I took things slowly. He needed that, and so did Lily. And honestly, so did I. Because falling in love with someone who comes with a grieving child is its own particular kind of serious, and you don't rush it. We dated for a year before I started spending real time at the house. The trust with Lily was built in increments so small you almost couldn't see them accumulating. The time she asked me to read one more chapter. The time she showed me a new drawing before she showed Brandon. The time she reached for my hand in the cereal aisle at Costco because there were too many people and she wanted something to hold on to. I kept a list in my phone, not because I'm strange, but because I'm an architect and I document things. And also because each of those moments felt like something I wanted to be able to find again if I ever needed to remember why any of it was worth it. She let me come to her school play in February of that year. 2nd grade, she was a narrator, she had 4 lines and delivered them with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. I sat in the folding chair gymnasium audience and clapped until my palms hurt. Afterward, she found me in the crowd first, before she found Brandon. And she didn't say anything, just tugged my sleeve and pointed at the paper program like she wanted me to see her name printed there. Lily Hartwell. I told her she was wonderful. She said, "I know," and then looked embarrassed that she'd said it. I loved her ferociously for that. Brandon's family was part of the picture from the beginning. His parents, Carol and Doug, lived in a suburb outside Seattle, about a 3-hour drive. He had a younger sister, Ashley, who lived in Tacoma with her fiancé, Ryan, and a cousin named Marcus, who showed up at big family gatherings. Carol was, from a distance, exactly the kind of woman who runs things. She organized the family holidays, she kept track of everyone's birthdays, she sent group texts about logistics and followed up if you didn't respond. Brandon clearly felt a gravitational pull toward all of that, especially after losing Lily's mother. He'd been floating untethered for over a year, and Carol had provided structure, phone calls, Sunday check-ins, the scaffolding of family routine. I understood it. I respected it even. I just didn't examine it closely enough in those first months. The first Easter after Brandon and I got serious, we drove up to Carol and Doug's house in the suburb outside Seattle. The whole family was there. Ashley and Ryan, Marcus and his girlfriend, 2 of Doug's siblings with their kids, and all the grandchildren. Carol had made Easter baskets for every grandchild, hand-painted, personalized, with each kid's name on them in those pastel letters she'd clearly spent real time on. The kids ranged in age from 3 to 12, and each one got a basket that was clearly assembled with that specific child in mind. Their favorite candy, a toy that matched a known interest, a little stuffed animal or book. They were genuinely beautiful. The kids grabbed them with the pure, unself-conscious delight of children who don't know yet to be grateful, which is its own kind of wonderful. Lily's basket was from the drugstore. I saw the sticker still on the bottom, the clearance sticker, orange, from a Walgreens chain. It was full of generic Easter candy, the kind that comes prepackaged in assorted lots, and there was no name on it. Carol handed it to Lily with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes and said, "There you go, honey," and moved on before Lily could respond. Lily held the basket for a moment and looked at it, and then looked at the other kids' baskets, and her face did a thing that I can only describe as very carefully not doing anything. She was 7 years old, and she already knew how to make her face neutral. That was the first day I hated Carol, though I didn't let myself use that word yet. I told myself it was the first Easter with Lily in the picture. Carol probably just didn't know what she liked yet, didn't know what to put in a personalized basket. Maybe she'd been rushed. I was very generous with my interpretations in those early days. I was trying to keep everything smooth for Brandon, who needed his family to work, and I was trying to be fair to a woman I didn't know well. I filed it away, and I moved on. The second incident was at Carol's birthday in June. It was a Saturday afternoon party, the kind with a catered spread and a photographer Carol had hired, and everyone in their summer clothes standing on the front porch of the house for a family portrait. Carol arranged them herself, the kids in front, the adults behind, Doug's arm around Carol in the center. She called each grandchild by name to come stand in their spot. She called her daughter's kids. She called Doug's nephew's kids. She did not call Lily. Lily was standing at the edge of the porch watching this assembly happen, and I watched her process the absence of her name, the way she very slightly, almost imperceptibly, took a step back. I was about to say something. I was literally opening my mouth when Carol said brightly to Lily, "Oh, sweetie, can you just step aside for a second? We're just doing the family picture and it'll only take a minute." And Lily stepped aside. And the photographer took the picture. And the minute stretched into 5 minutes, and no one called Lily back. Brandon was in the picture. I was standing near the door inside, not in it. I wasn't family yet, which was fair. And I watched Lily stand at the edge of the porch with her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. And I felt something cold and specific settle into my chest. That's not a mistake. That is not a rushed or distracted person who forgot a child. That is a deliberate act of erasure performed on a 7-year-old at her step-grandmother's birthday party in front of her entire extended family. And I knew it. I didn't say it yet. I wrote it down that night in the Notes app on my phone. __, June 14th, Carol's birthday, family portrait. Lily asked to step aside, not called back. Brandon in photo, Lily not. __. Then I put my phone down and lay in the dark next to Brandon and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I brought it up with Brandon gently the next morning over coffee. I said I'd noticed Lily wasn't included in the family photo and asked if he thought that was intentional. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom probably she gets into organizational mode and she forgets to think about how things look. I'll mention it to her." I said, "Okay." He mentioned it to her. Carol apparently said she thought Lily might be uncomfortable in a formal photo with people she didn't know well yet, that she was trying to be sensitive. Brandon reported this back to me, and I looked at him and I thought, you need this to be a misunderstanding so much that you are accepting an explanation that makes no sense. But I didn't say that. I wrote it in my notes. Carol's explanation didn't want Lily to be uncomfortable. Brandon accepted it. The Christmas video was the one that made me say the word pattern out loud for the first time. Carol put together a family holiday video every year, a compilation of photos from the past 12 months, set to music, posted publicly on Facebook, sent to the extended family mailing list. It had everyone's names captioned at the bottom of their photos. Every grandchild, every spouse and partner, every cousin and aunt and family friend who'd appeared at more than 2 gatherings. The Christmas video that year had 12 children in it, each identified by first name in the caption. Lily appeared in exactly 1 photograph, a candid shot from Thanksgiving, and her name was not captioned. The photo was attributed to our Thanksgiving celebration. Every other person in that same photo was named. Lily was not. I watched the video on my laptop, alone in my home office, on a Tuesday afternoon in January, and I watched it 3 times. And then I closed it, and I said out loud to the empty room, "That's a pattern." I called my friend Diane that night. Diane has known me for 11 years, and she is not a person who inflames things. She is a listener and a careful thinker, and she doesn't tell you what you want to hear. I told her about the Easter basket, the birthday photo, the Christmas video. I went through them in order. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Megan, that's not absent-mindedness. That's a choice being made over and over." I said, "I know." She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet. I'm going to keep watching." That was my mistake, actually. Not the watching, but the waiting. I kept watching, and I kept documenting, and I kept trying to believe there was a version of this that didn't require me to blow up Brandon's family. And I let a 1.5 years go by while Lily existed in that family like a footnote in her own story. But I don't blame myself for it entirely. I was new to this. I was trying to protect Brandon. And I was still, somewhere, hoping I was wrong. I was not wrong. The Alaska cruise was announced on a Sunday in March. We drove up to Seattle for what Carol had described in the group text as a spring family dinner, which I'd assumed meant what it usually meant: pot roast and wine and Doug's slightly too loud stories about his golfing trips, and Carol moving efficiently around the kitchen while directing everyone else's movements like air traffic control. We arrived around 2 in the afternoon. Lily had a book with her, which was new. She'd started reading thick novels that year, fantasy series, anything with maps in the front. And she settled onto the end of the couch with it while the adults milled around. I went to help Carol in the kitchen because that was the established dance, and Carol accepted my help in the particular way she had of accepting things from me, which was to give me tasks that required no judgment or initiative and to supervise them closely. I sliced bread. I refilled water glasses. I was permitted to be useful in ways that required no authority. Dinner was fine, the way those dinners were always fine. Surface conversation, family updates, Ashley talking about the wedding planning, Doug talking about the golf trip he wanted to take to Ireland. And then Carol set down her wine glass and said she had some exciting news. She had been planning, she and Doug, and they hoped everyone could make it, a family cruise to Alaska. Late July, a week on the ship, the Inside Passage, glaciers, whale watching. She'd been researching it for months. She'd already gotten a group rate. She went around the table listing the people she'd been planning for: herself and Doug, Ashley and Ryan, Ashley's kids when she had them eventually, Marcus and his girlfriend, Brandon. She said Brandon's name and paused to look at him, making sure he was taking this in. She did not say Lily's name. I waited. I sat with my water glass in my hand, and I waited for the addendum, "and of course, Lily," the natural completion of that sentence. It did not come. Carol moved on to talking about the ship's amenities and the shore excursions she'd been researching, and I felt the table's silence from Brandon's direction, the particular quality of his stillness that I'd learned to read, the stillness that meant he was doing the same calculation I was doing and arriving at a result he didn't want. I set my water glass down. I said, "Carol, I just want to make sure I understood the list. You mentioned Brandon, but Lily's coming too, right?" Carol's expression did something very specific. It didn't falter, it adjusted, the way you adjust a thermostat, something small and internal being recalibrated while the exterior stays exactly the same. She smiled pleasantly and said, "Well, we thought it would be better for Lily to have a quieter summer. She's not used to our family trips yet." Lily was sitting 2 seats down from me. She had her book open on her lap, but I don't think she was reading it. She was 8 years old, going on 9, and she'd been in this family for 4 years. She heard every word. The room went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet, where everyone pretends something wasn't said. The pressurized kind, where you can feel the table's surface suddenly getting very interesting to everyone at it. Doug picked up his wine. Ashley looked at her plate. Brandon picked up his fork and held it, and then set it down. The mashed potatoes were sitting in the middle of the table in a white dish with a blue rim, and they smelled like every Sunday I'd ever tried to believe this family was fixable, like something warm and domestic that was covering up something that had been wrong for a very long time. I kept my voice very, very even. I said, "Carol, Lily has been part of this family for 4 years. What exactly is she waiting to be used to?" The question sat there. Carol's smile stayed in place with the fixed quality of something bolted down. She said, "I just think these big family trips can be overwhelming for children who are still getting comfortable. I'm thinking of her." I looked at her. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, "You are not thinking of her. You have never thought of her. You have spent 4 years erasing her from photographs and Easter baskets and holiday videos, and now you are sitting at this table and telling a 10-year-old child to her face that she doesn't belong on a family vacation with the family she has lived in for 4 years, and you are calling it consideration." I did not say any of that. I said, "I see," and I picked up my water glass and I took a very slow drink, and I looked at the window across the room, and I let myself be completely, utterly still. Brandon said, "Mom, Lily is part of our family." His voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before. Not angry, not pleading, just flat. Like something had been put down on a table that was not going to be picked back up. Carol said, "Of course she is, sweetheart. I'm not saying she's not." Lily closed her book. We left an hour later, earlier than usual. Brandon loaded Lily into the back seat, and we drove through the suburb in silence, the kind of silence that has weight and direction. We got onto the highway, and Lily was looking out the window, and I was looking at the road, and Brandon was doing something with his jaw, the subtle grinding thing he does when he is holding something in. We were maybe 20 minutes out of the city when Brandon said very quietly, directed at the rearview mirror, directed at Lily, "I'm sorry about what Grandma said today. That wasn't okay. It wasn't right." Lily didn't move for a moment. Then she said, "It's okay. I'm used to it." She said it in such a matter-of-fact voice, not sad, not bitter, not performing the lines of a child who needs comfort, just factual, like she was reporting on the weather or the traffic or something that simply existed in her landscape. "It's okay. I'm used to it." The most devastating possible response to the most devastating possible situation. Brandon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I watched his knuckles go white and then consciously, deliberately, go soft. He said, "You shouldn't have to be." His voice was steady, but something in it was broken. Not in the way of something new being destroyed, but in the way of something you hadn't wanted to look at directly, finally being looked at. He'd known, on some level, I think. You don't not notice. You just decide how much you can afford to register, and you manage your awareness in whatever way lets you keep functioning. Lily's 7 words in the backseat of that car blew that management system apart. I watched it happen. He didn't cry, but it was the closest thing to it that I'd ever seen from him. I put my hand on his arm, lightly, just to be there. He didn't say anything. Lily went back to looking out the window. We drove the rest of the 3 hours mostly quiet, and I sat with what I now knew, which was that I was done. Not angry done, not reactive done. The cold, clear, architectural kind of done, where you have looked at a structure and determined that it cannot be repaired, and now you are deciding what to build instead. I want to tell you that I acted immediately. I didn't. There was a period of about 2 weeks after the dinner where Brandon and I talked about it, really talked, in the late evenings after Lily was asleep. He called his mother. The call did not go well. Carol cried, apparently, and expressed that she felt attacked, and said that Megan had been hostile to her from the beginning and that she was trying so hard and no one appreciated it. Brandon came home from that call looking like a man who has presented an engineering calculation to a client who doesn't believe in math. He sat down on the couch and said, "She really believes her own version of this." I said, "I know." He said, "What do we do?" I said, "Give me a few days. I want to walk you through what happened during those few days because it matters." I went into my home office on a Thursday evening, after Lily was in bed, and I opened the folder on my desktop that I had been slowly, almost unconsciously, accumulating for 3 years. Because here is the thing about being an architect. You photograph and date stamp everything automatically. Change orders, site conditions, neighbor disputes. You document not because you're planning for conflict, but because documentation is the professional habit so deeply ingrained it operates below the level of intention. And somewhere in the back of my brain, some part of me had known, even when the front of my brain was still making excuses, that I was going to need what I was building. The folder had 47 items, photos with metadata, dates, timestamps, screenshots of group texts where Lily's name was consistently absent from the logistics of family events she'd apparently been invited to but never named, the Christmas video, saved, a screenshot of the Facebook post, a photograph I'd taken of the Easter baskets side by side, Carol's personalized ones for the other children, and the Walgreens clearance basket for Lily, because I'd been standing in the hallway when they were distributed, and I'd raised my phone automatically, the way I raise my phone at a job site when I see something that shouldn't be there. The date on that photo was 3 years ago. I hadn't even realized I'd kept it. I'd just kept it because I document things. I opened that photo and looked at it for a long time, and I thought, Carol had no idea. She had no idea I was building this, because she'd looked at me and seen someone who would grieve quietly and forgive publicly. and she was catastrophically wrong about what kind of person I am. I called Nina the next morning. Nina is a friend from my early Portland years. She's a family lawyer, not because I was planning to sue anyone, but because I wanted someone who understood legal documentation to sit with me and tell me what I actually had. We met at her office on a Friday afternoon, and I brought the folder, printed and organized, and I walked her through it. She was quiet while I presented it. She has a very good lawyer face, no reactions until she's ready. And when I finished, she sat back and said, "Megan, this is 3 years of documented emotional neglect of a child." I said, "I know." She said, "You're not suing anyone?" I said, "No." I said, "I just want to understand what I'm looking at." She said, "You're looking at a pattern of deliberate exclusion, documented by date and incident, across a 3-year period. You didn't miss anything. You caught everything." I sat in my car in the parking lot of Nina's office building for a while after that. I don't know how long. I looked out through the windshield at the parking structure across the street, the concrete levels going up, and I held the folder on my lap, and I thought about Lily's gray drawings in the shoebox under her bed. I thought about the fact that she was 10 years old now, and she'd been drawing in color for about a year, bright oranges and blues, and this particular green she used for forests that I loved. And I thought about how that shift had happened, that slow incremental shift from gray to color, and what it had taken for it to happen, and what it would take for it to be permanent. Then I went home. Over the next few days, I made decisions. I want to be clear about the emotional quality of these decisions, because it matters. They were not made in anger. Anger burns hot and fast and makes mistakes. What I was working in was something colder and steadier, the calm you feel when you've spent 3 years looking at a problem from every angle and you finally know exactly what the measurements are. I was an architect making a demolition plan, methodical, precise, no waste. The first thing I did was stop the money. This sounds more dramatic than it was in terms of the specific amounts. What I had been contributing, informally and without ever being asked to formalize it, was roughly $400 a month in various forms. Brandon's family had gradually, over the years of our marriage, come to rely on small financial contributions that had started as gestures and calcified into expectations. Carol's internet bill? Brandon had started paying it when she retired and hadn't stopped. I'd taken over that without discussion when I started managing our household finances. Grocery delivery orders during the months Carol was stretched thin, roughly twice a year, averaging $40 to $60 a pop. Birthday and holiday gifts from Brandon and Megan that I had researched, purchased, wrapped, and shipped because Brandon left those things to me. Small, invisible financial support that a household generates when one of its members is organized and generous and has quietly absorbed the labor of maintaining family relationships because the alternative felt unkind. I stopped all of it. I didn't announce it. I just stopped. The internet bill went unpaid and would eventually, I knew this, result in a service interruption, which would result in a call to Brandon, which would result in an awkward conversation that I had already decided Brandon was prepared to have. The grocery orders stopped. The gifts, which had, I should note, never come with any acknowledgement that I was the one who'd researched and procured them, only ever a brief, "Tell Brandon thank you," stopped entirely. The second thing I did was withdraw from the wedding coordination. Ashley was marrying Ryan in 6 weeks. I had been, for the past 8 months, serving as the de facto wedding coordinator for free. Not officially, but functionally. Ashley doesn't have an organized bone in her body, and she loves her brother's wife in the loose, convenient way of people who like having someone useful around. I had been managing vendor communications, building the day of timeline, coordinating the rehearsal dinner logistics with the restaurant, tracking RSVPs because Ashley's system for tracking them was a chain of text messages she kept losing. I had done this because I like logistics, and because I'd thought it would build goodwill with the family, which was a reasoning I now evaluated with the flat clarity of someone who had recently spent an hour in a lawyer's office with 3 years of documentation. I withdrew. I sent Ashley a brief text, just a few sentences, warm in tone, not accusatory, saying that due to some family things I was navigating, I was no longer able to serve as coordinator for the wedding, and I wanted to give her as much notice as possible to find someone else. I said I hoped everything went beautifully. I left it there. Ashley's response came within 2 hours. It was not warm. It was about 3 paragraphs long and included the phrases, blindsiding us 6 weeks out, extremely unprofessional, I thought we were family, and honestly, I expected better from you. I read it, screenshotted it, added it to the folder, and did not respond. The third thing I did was the most deliberate, and I want to walk you through the reasoning because I don't want it to be misconstrued. I chose 4 people in Carol's world to contact. I did not choose them randomly, and I did not choose them for maximum damage. I chose them because they were the people who had shown Lily genuine warmth over the years, and who deserved to know, I believed, what had been happening. Donna, Carol's neighbor and closest friend for 25 years, who had given Lily a hug at the Thanksgiving gathering and called her a sweetheart, who had asked about her school and listened to the answer. Tia Jeanette, Doug's sister, who had sent Lily birthday cards every year with real notes inside them, who had asked Brandon for Lily's current interests so she could send things she'd actually like. Marcus, Doug's nephew, who had pulled Lily into the backyard games at every big family gathering without being asked, who had let her be on his team and never made her feel like an afterthought. And the pastor of Carol's church, not to be vicious, but because Carol's standing in that community was important to her, and because she had, I happen to know through Carol's own Facebook posts, spoken from the pulpit about the importance of welcoming all children and all families. I felt that this person deserved to make their own assessment. I wrote 4 letters, not emails, letters, printed on plain paper, signed by hand. Each one was different, tailored to the relationship, but each one contained the same core, a brief explanation of who I was, a clear and factual account of the incidents I had documented, the dates and details and specific words I had recorded, and a note that I was not asking for anything, only sharing what I felt they should know as people who cared about the family. I did not use emotional language. I did not call Carol names. I described events the way I would describe a sight condition in a change order. Here is what occurred, here is the date, here is the documentation. I included, for each letter, a printed set of relevant photos, the Easter baskets, the Christmas video screenshots, the family portrait from the birthday party with Lily clearly visible at the edge of the frame, not included, waiting. I mailed them on a Monday morning. Then I went to work and designed a kitchen extension for a client in Lake Oswego, and ate a sandwich at my desk and did not think about what was going to happen next. I had built the thing. It would run its course. The first response came faster than I expected. Donna called Brandon, not me, called his cell phone on a Wednesday evening while we were both home. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen while I was cleaning up from dinner. The conversation was long. At one point, Brandon sat down on the couch, which he does when conversations require his full attention. I gave Lily her bath and read to her and tucked her in and came back downstairs and found Brandon still on the phone, quieter now, mostly listening. He got off the call about 20 minutes later. He sat with his phone in his hand for a moment and then looked at me and said, "Donna got your letter." I said, "I know." He said, "She called Mom." I said, "What did Carol say?" He said, "She didn't deny it. She said," and here he stopped and rubbed his face the way he does when something is difficult to organize into words. He said, "She said, quote, 'She's not my grandchild. I don't know why everyone expects me to pretend.'" I looked at him for a moment. I said, out loud, to myself as much as to him, "She said that to Donna?" He said yes. I said, "Donna, who has known Lily for 3 years and called her a sweetheart at Thanksgiving." He said yes. I sat down in the chair across from him and we looked at each other, and I felt something that I don't have a precise word for. Not satisfaction, not triumph, something quieter and heavier than that. The confirmation that you were right is not always a relief. Sometimes it just means you were carrying something true all along and the weight of it was real. What Carol did not understand about Donna, what Carol perhaps had never correctly understood about any of her relationships, was that Donna was a woman of deep, specific, moral feeling about children. I knew this from the Thanksgiving conversation. I knew it from the way she talked about her own grandchildren, about the importance of children being seen and named and valued. Carol had said the quiet part out loud to exactly the wrong person. Donna repeated it. She told 2 mutual friends. She told her sister. She did not do this to be cruel. I don't think Donna is a cruel person. She did it because she was genuinely shaken, and she was processing it with the people in her life, the way people do. And the word spread the way true things spread, which is faster than you'd expect and further than you can track. Marcus texted Brandon that week. He said he'd gotten the letter, and he'd been thinking about it, and he just wanted Brandon to know that he'd always felt something was off at the family gatherings with how Lily was treated, but he hadn't known how to say it or whether it was his place. He said he was sorry he hadn't said it sooner. Brandon showed me the text, and we sat with it for a while. It was one of those messages that's both a kindness and an indictment. Not of Marcus, he was being honest and generous, but of the years of silence that had allowed the pattern to continue because enough people in the room had felt something was wrong and had talked themselves out of saying it. Jeanette called me directly. She's Doug's sister, Carol's sister-in-law, and she's the kind of woman who gets to the point. She said she'd read the letter, and she wanted me to know that she was heartbroken. Not surprised, but heartbroken. She said Carol had always had a way of keeping her circle small and her definitions tighter than they should be, which was the most diplomatic phrasing of a very specific thing, and I appreciated her precision. She said she was going to have a conversation with Doug. I thanked her. She said, "That little girl deserves to know she's loved." I said, "I think she's starting to know that." Jeanette said, "Good," and that she'd like to come visit sometime, if that was all right, and that she wanted to get to know Lily better. I said, "Yes, of course. Come whenever." Ashley sent a second message about the wedding, this one longer and more desperate in tone. She'd apparently tried to hire a professional coordinator on 6 weeks' notice and encountered, to her apparent surprise, that competent wedding coordinators have full calendars. She said she understood that things were complicated right now, but couldn't we just put aside the family stuff for the sake of the wedding? She'd been planning this for 2 years. It wasn't her fault what had happened. Please. I read the message once. Then I wrote back 4 sentences. "Ashley, I hope you're able to find the support you need for the wedding. I genuinely want it to be a wonderful day. I'm not in a position to continue in a coordinator role given what has happened. I wish you both so much happiness." I read it back twice to check the tone, then sent it. Her next message started with, "Are you serious right now?" And I didn't read past the first line. I added it to the folder. About 2 weeks after the letters went out, Carol called Brandon. I was not in the room for this call, but Brandon told me about it afterward in detail, the way he'd started doing, the full transparency that a crisis forces when it has stripped away the managing and the minimizing and the space holding that both of you had been doing for the sake of something that turned out not to be worth holding that space for. Carol was upset. She said she felt ambushed. She said Megan had gone behind her back and poisoned everyone against her. She said she'd never meant to hurt Lily. She just needed time to adjust to the situation. Surely Brandon understood that. Brandon listened to all of it. Then he said, very quietly, "Mom, Lily has been in our family for 4 years. She is 10 years old. She heard you say she wasn't used to family trips. She hears a lot of things. I've been making excuses for the way you treat her for 4 years, and I'm done." Carol cried. Carol said he was being unfair. Brandon said he loved her, and he was going to need some space for a while, and he got off the phone. He came and found me in the home office. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the spot where I sat with Nina's words still clear in my head, "You caught everything." And he said, "She said she just needed time to adjust." I said, 4 years is a long time to adjust." He said, "I know. I knew it when I was accepting that. I needed it not to be what it was." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have been louder." I said, You said something in the car. You told her she shouldn't have to be used to it. That mattered." He nodded. We sat there for a while in the quiet, and it wasn't a comfortable quiet, but it was an honest one, which is a different thing. I want to tell you about a moment that happened a few weeks after all of this. Carol had by then stopped calling Brandon daily. The calls had dropped off to once a week, then less, a combination of wounded pride and, I think, a slow dawning understanding that her tactics had run out. The internet at her house was disconnected for about a week before Brandon, independently, paid the bill. Not because I asked him to or because I had any feeling about it, but because he made his own decision about what he was and wasn't willing to let happen. I had already said what I had to say. The logistics of his relationship with his mother were his to manage. I had my own things to attend to. What I was attending to was Lily. She had a school project that month, a family tree, the kind of thing teachers assign without always thinking through which families might find it complicated. Lily came home with the assignment and looked at it for a long time at the kitchen table, and then looked at me and said, "Is it okay if I put you on it?" And I said, "Lily, it would be an honor." She looked at me for a moment with that serious, evaluating look she'd had since she was 6 years old, and then she went back to her project. She drew it carefully, the way she did everything, with those bright markers she'd graduated to, the forests in her particular green, the figures of people in warm colors. She drew me on the tree. She drew herself connected to me. She labeled it in her careful second-grade printing. She was in 5th grade now, but her printing still had that careful deliberateness. And she brought it to school and came home with a good grade and didn't make a big thing of it. There were other things, small things, the size of the things that actually matter. She started asking my opinion on her drawings in a specific way. Not, "Is this good?" but, "Does this feel right?" which is a more interesting question, and one that I think came from watching me evaluate architectural plans. She started telling me things without being asked, the spontaneous sharing that children do when they trust someone completely. What happened at school, what her friend Camille said, what she'd been thinking about that book she was reading. She let me braid her hair for picture day, which she'd never done before, and she looked in the mirror afterward and said, "That's good," with a satisfaction that I carried around for a week. And then there was the morning with the toast. It was a Saturday, October, gray and wet in the particular Portland way that I love. Lily was at the kitchen counter making herself breakfast. She'd started making her own weekend breakfast that year, which was partly independence and partly the particular self-sufficiency of a child who had learned early not to need too much from any one person. Brandon was still asleep. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee and a set of plans spread in front of me. Lily put 2 pieces of bread in the toaster and stood there waiting for them, looking out the rain-streaked window at the backyard. When the toast popped, she got out the butter and started spreading it, unhurried, and she said, still looking at the toast, not looking at me, "Mom, do we have any of the good jam?" She didn't stop. She didn't look up. She didn't indicate in any way that she'd heard herself say it, or that it was different from any other word, or that she'd been carrying it around in her chest for months, waiting for a morning when it might fall out on its own. She just asked about the jam. I said, "Top shelf, left side, the strawberry one." She opened the refrigerator and found it and went back to her toast. And I looked at my plans, and I didn't make a sound, and I pressed my fingernails into my palm under the table so I had somewhere to put the feeling that was moving through me, which was large and warm and had been a long time arriving. That was the moment. Not the letters, not the documentation, not the conversation in Brandon's mother's dining room with the papers on the table. This was the moment. A 10-year-old girl asking about jam and calling me Mom like it was just a word, like it had always been a word, like she'd always known what to call me and had just been waiting until it felt safe enough to say it out loud. Jeanette came to visit in December. She drove down from her place near Olympia and she stayed 2 nights, and she brought Christmas gifts for each of us, and for Lily, she brought a stocking, the kind of stocking that takes effort, the embroidered kind with a name on it in gold thread, Lily in capital letters, each one slightly different because it was hand-stitched rather than machine-embroidered. Lily opened it and looked at it for a long time. She touched the letters with her fingertip, tracing the L and the I and the L and the Y. She said, "It has my name." Jeanette said, "Of course it does. Where else would it go?" Lily looked up at her and smiled, the real smile, not the polite one. And then she went and hung it on the fireplace mantel next to Brandon's and mine, and she adjusted it so it was straight. And then she stood back and looked at it, the way she looked at things that mattered to her, quietly and for a long time. Carol didn't come for Christmas that year. We heard, through Brandon's occasional calls with his father, that she was struggling. Doug was quieter about it than she was, which was how Doug operated. He'd always seemed slightly bewildered by his wife's intensity and had long since found it easier to stay out of the way of it. She had lost some social standing, apparently, in the particular way that happens in small communities when someone's private behavior becomes known, not through any formal judgment, but through the slow recalibration of how people treat you when they know something true about you that you didn't intend for them to know. Donna still had her as a neighbor, but was, by all accounts, different with her. The pastor had apparently sent a note. I never saw it, but Doug mentioned it once, obliquely, and the fact that he mentioned it at all told me it had registered. She had not apologized to Lily. She had not apologized to me. She had, as far as I knew, not apologized to anyone, which was consistent with who she was, a woman who had organized a family around her own narrative for so long that the idea of a narrative in which she was at fault was structurally inaccessible to her. I didn't spend much time thinking about it. I had what I had. Ryan had reached out to Brandon a few weeks after everything unfolded. He'd sent a text that said he'd always felt at the family gatherings that something was off about how Lily was treated, and he'd never said anything because he hadn't been sure it was his place, and also, he admitted, because Ashley would have been upset. He said he was sorry he hadn't said something. Brandon said thank you. The two of them had continued texting occasionally after that. Nothing heavy, just ordinary contact, sports and work updates, the kind of low-stakes relationship maintenance that men do. Ashley had not reached out. Her wedding had happened. Someone had found a coordinator, or managed without one, or let some things fall through that didn't need to happen. I didn't know the details and hadn't asked. From what I understood, it had gone fine. I hoped it had. Marcus came to Lily's 11th birthday party. He drove down from Tacoma, which was more than 2 hours, and he brought a gift he'd clearly thought about, a set of professional-grade colored pencils in a tin case, 96 colors, the kind that cost real money and are the difference between a child who draws and a child who is taken seriously as someone who draws. Lily opened them and went very still in the way she does when something has moved her. She said, "These are the real kind." Marcus said, "Only kind worth having." She looked at him for a moment and then gave him a hug, which was not something Lily did casually, and he hugged her back with the slightly surprised deference of a man who is genuinely honored. That's the circle now. Jeanette, Marcus, Donna sometimes. She'd reached out to me directly after everything, which I hadn't expected, and we'd had a phone call that was strange and clarifying in equal measure. Ryan, quietly, Brandon and Lily and me. A kitchen with good jam and Saturday toast and architectural plans spread on the table and colored pencil drawings tacked to the walls, the ones in bright oranges and blues and Lily's particular green. I spent 3 years trying to earn a place at their table. I documented everything. I made my arguments. I sent my letters. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, quietly, without announcement, I had already built a better one.